Well, it's I mean, like, Europe is completely hopeless. It's a hopeless situation. For the past 20 years, it's America has screwed over Europe. So these wars in the Middle East created millions of refugees who then went to Europe. And I don't know what the Europeans were thinking in allowing these millions of refugees to come into the society when they didn't have the capacity to absorb these millions of refugees, right? So Angela Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, famously said, "We can do it." No, you can't. And time has shown that these millions of refugees have put a tremendous strain on the social cohesion, on the capacity of the state to govern Europe. So there's tremendous political fissures within Europe at this point. And so that's why you see the rise of these right-wing parties throughout Europe. But the main problem, as you point out, is the economy. So Europe suffers from an aging population. So the population itself is no longer as dynamic as it used to be. Before the German model was very good. It was this, buy cheap um, Russian energy, make really good German cars, subcontract the labor to Poland, and then sell extremely expensive German cars to China. It's a great model for Germany. But then when Trump came into office, um, the China market, Germany lost access to the China market. And then when you have this war break out, Germany can no longer buy cheap Russian energy. And as you point out, the Europeans then pivoted to the Middle East, primarily Qatar, and now Qatar has basically shut down all LNG production. And so Europe is completely screwed in the process. And Macron has talked about sending an aircraft carrier to the Middle East. What's that going to do? I mean, send an aircraft carrier so that the Iranians can sink it with a ballistic missile? I mean, what's the point of that? And still at this time, the Europeans are still talking about drafting young men to go die in the trenches of Ukraine in 2029. So the European elite have their head in the sand. They have absolutely no idea what's going on. They have absolutely no solution to the multiple crises that they face. And Europe is a dumpster fire. I hate to say this, but it's a dumpster fire.
Well, it's hard to disagree with that assessment, but no, things are going from bad to worse. I think the reason why Europe went from this immense optimism to now just crash, you can say hubris and all this, which is all correct. I think it was the post-Cold World order, though. It became ideal for the Europeans. That is, the United States were, declared the unipolar moment. The the role of the Europeans in this world was, well, let's have a collective hegemony of the political West, standing on these two legs of the US and the EU, hoping that Europe would be an equal partner to the United States. And not only would the political West dominate the world, but it would be a force for good, because not only would it prevent great power rivalry, but also by dominating the liberal democratic West would be able to elevate the role of liberal democratic values, humanitarian ideals. So again, it's almost like a civilizing mission. The dominance is and sovereign inequality is a force for good in the world. The world will thank us for dominating. So this is the benign hegemon. It's very appealing if you're a politician and you say we dominate, and the world will love us for it. So now that, of course, this is falling apart, I guess a bit of a mirage, like the Gulf states were relying on. There's no clarity what to do, and there's no political imagination, because they outsourced all strategic thinking to the US for 80 years. Now the US is essentially pulling out its knives for the Europeans. They've done this, as you said, over the past 20 years, but they did it more covertly. Now they're quite open about their contempt for Europe. So no, I think Europe is done. But what does this mean for the wider world order? Because this idea of the international distribution being focused around US global primacy, legitimized then by liberal democratic values, this world order, the post-Cold world order of the liberal hegemony, is gone. So the US is not dominant anymore, and liberal democratic values, I mean, no one really thinks this is what the Western powers are, that these are their objectives in foreign policy. it's a thin veil which has been tossed away. So what is the new world order then, from your perspective, or what will follow this?
Right. Right. So there will be three major trends that follow from this, okay? The first major trend is deindustrialization. Because you don't have access to cheap energy. So you need to make your economy much more balanced before we have the growth of urban centers, which engage in the knowledge economy, which engage in AI, in EV, in solar panels, right? But all of that requires access to cheap energy, which is what the Middle East provided. But now that the Middle East is going to be destroyed or be engulfed in war for the next 10, 20 years, you have to deindustrialize. You have to focus more on self-sufficiency. Okay, so that's the first trend, deindustrialization. Second major trend is mercantilism. Okay, and what I mean by that is that the global order is dead. And so what you need to do is basically focus on local trade or creating your own supply networks, spheres of influence. Okay, and the third major trend, which is most troubling, is remilitarization, because Pax Americana is dead, and Pax Judaica is not interested in protecting you from big bad bullies. Okay, so it's either you rearm as soon as possible and defend yourself, or you'll be eaten alive by a wolf. Right. So I think in East Asia, the first nation to recognize the changing world order, because it has no choice in the matter, is Japan. I think that they brought in Prime Minister Takaichi because she appealed to the young, and she has the charisma to galvanize the young to make the sacrifices necessary in order to deindustrialize, remilitarize, and create a self-sufficient economic system. So I think that Japan will actually suffer in the beginning, but they will actually be in the forefront of global change. And nations that absolutely refuse to make these three necessary changes will be the most likely to suffer. And quite honestly, I have very little hope for my own country, which is China. I think that because of these changes, uh, Japan will start to emerge as the local hegemon, while China is still stuck to the old global order. But in the short term, what this means is that the United States and China will have a rapprochement. Okay, so even though this war has started, Trump will still visit Beijing uh, March 31st, at the end of this month, for a 3-day state visit. And I think that people will be surprised by how friendly and productive this meeting will be. And in fact, actually this year, there are scheduled 3 major summits between China and the United States. And so I think that both nations are working towards a rapprochement in order to repair the global order. But there's no saving the global order. It's dying. And so if you omit this reality and commit to revamping society, deindustrialization, remilitarization, and moving towards a self-sufficient economy, then you are much more likely to weather the storm that is coming.
You say that China's stuck in the old world order, and one can see why. Well, with 40 years of unprecedented prosperity and growth in human history, one can see why one would want to, at all costs, keep this world going, even though it already went away. It's not that unlike the Europeans, though, because then, the 90s, was a rebirth of Europe, or thought together with the US was the center of the world. I remember having books at university which were with the title "Why the 21st Century Belongs to Europe." I mean, this was kind of the mentality. I thought that was also always a bit ridiculous, but anyways, there was reason for optimism, it seemed. So that's why they also cling on to a world order which is dying, which is why they're not able to adjust to the new world. One place, though, where there's a lot of pressure to readjust to the new order is Russia. That is, the spokesperson Peskov. He made a comment now recently saying that we have lost we have all lost what we call international law. So the system is essentially dying, if not dead. And I think what really shook them was the decapitation strike on Iran, because this is, the desperate act of a dying empire. And why wouldn't they do the same towards Russia? Indeed, they've been attacking their nuclear deterrent very openly, I would say. There's I think this it's likely that they tried to assassinate Putin at Valdai with this attack. At least, you know, is a theory. And again, why wouldn't they go for a decapitation strike against Russia? This is what many are thinking. They look what they done to Iran. There's no rules. So why then is Russia doing this slow war of attrition? And also, they did this at the expense of their deterrent. That is, they allowed the Americans and the Europeans to openly, you know, launch missiles deep into Russia. You can have a German chancellor sitting on stage saying, "Oh yes, we imposed untold casualties on the Russians." I mean, this there's so much pressure now on the Kremlin to drop this, whatever they've done the past 4 years, and why not do like the Iranians? Time to, you know, bring some pain to the Europeans, because the Europeans for the past 4 years said, why should the war be limited to Ukraine? Why not also extend it to Russia? Well, why shouldn't the Russians bring it to Europe? This is what I see as the direction, which is, well, terrifying, because this is yeah, a, you know, recipe for a much larger war. I was wondering how do you see this, the Russian component here, because you know they're also one of the great powers.
Right. So what? So I look. I personally think that of all the world leaders, Vladimir Putin is the only one with a grand strategy. He's a very capable leader, and he sees the big picture. He plays chess. And so what he's waiting for is a U.S. ground invasion of Iran. That's what he's waiting for. Because once the United States sends in ground troops, then the United States is all in. It can't extricate itself from the situation. And at any point, the United States can stop this air campaign and say, you know what? We killed the Ayatollah. We destroyed the Iranian nuclear threat. So we're going to go home, guys. Goodbye, okay? But once the United States sends in ground troops, then it's locked in to this Iranian quagmire for 5 to 10 years, and there's no escaping. It'll be like another Vietnam, right? This gives Putin and Russia the perfect opportunity to move towards Odessa, which is the real goal and the end goal of this war in Ukraine. Because once they have Odessa, then they have basically achieved all their major military objectives. And so what's going to happen is the Europeans will have no choice but to defend Odessa to the last European. And that's where the next major conflict will be, the siege of Odessa. And if the siege of Odessa were to happen, the Europeans would exhaust themselves defending against the Russian attack. The Russians have perfected drone artillery warfare in the trenches of Ukraine, and that's a perfect combination if you are to besiege Odessa. And so the Europeans, they may be fresh, but they will be inexperienced. And so they will make a lot of mistakes. They will lose a lot of casualties. And this war will eventually become so unpopular back in Europe that the population would revolt against the governments. Okay. So remember, this is a time of nuclear war. So you can't actually destroy each other's military. But what you can do is put so much stress and pain on the political system that the citizens ultimately rebel and overthrow the political system and impose a new system that is much more friendly towards Russia. So that, I think, is the grand plan that Putin has, and it's going to work.
Well, I think it's the Chinese who say we live in interesting times. So thank you
Too
very
interesting.
much. Huh?
It's much too interesting.
Well, thank you for taking the time. And yeah, it's as you began saying, this war against Iran, it's hard to believe that they went through with this, given all the risks. But this is, I always make the point, this is going to be the greatest catastrophe, is this illusion of escalation control, the assumption that they can control all the variables, decide how it ends, who's allowed to participate, how they contribute. I mean, this is really the same as with the Russians in Ukraine. This assumption of escalation control, this is what's going to kill us effectively, though.
Well, I will say this. I made this prediction 2 years ago. The United States would invade Iran. I've been saying for 2 years consistently that this would happen. The moment that it happened, I was shocked and bewildered, and I couldn't sleep because I was like, why would they do this? So, so yeah, I mean, I sympathize with what you're feeling.